Hello and welcome everyone to this afternoon's session, which is Preparing for Literacy. How can the evidence help us to think about our curriculum in the early years foundation stage? My name's Julian Grenier. I'm director at East London Research School, and I'm very pleased to be joined this afternoon by two of our evidence leads in education, Fliss James and Alison Carvalho. In this session, we're going to be thinking about the Education Endowment Foundation's guidance report, Preparing for Literacy, which is all about what the evidence tells us are the best ways to improve the communication, language and literacy of our children in the early years. And East London Research School, where we're speaking from this evening, is part of the National Research School Network. And we hope you enjoy our session. And we also hope that you'll Google the Research School Network, find your local research school, sign up to their newsletter and take part in more events like this. So why bother? What is this early intervention argument all about? Here is a very sobering fact. Gaps between children living in disadvantaged circumstances and other children are already present by the end of the early years foundation stage. Those gaps, on average, double by the end of primary school and double again by the end of secondary school. It's a really concerning fact. And half my family is Canadian. And one of the things that motivates me to be part of this work is the knowledge that in Canada, there is nowhere near such a strong link between how well off you are and how well you do in school. But in England, on average, it's a big deal. And perhaps even more surprisingly, schools rated outstanding by Ofsted still have a similar issue about the gap between disadvantaged children and the others. The outcomes overall may be better for the children, but the gap is still there. But we can flip this around in the early years as well. We can pay careful attention to the significance of that gap because, as I said, on average, it will double by the end of primary and double again by the end of secondary. We can do something about it. In fact, there's a whole lot of very strong evidence, most notably the EPSI project, which tells us that high quality early education and childcare is good for every child, but it's especially good for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Nevertheless, when we look at outcomes by the end of the EYFS, we can see that from 2013 to 2019, the EYFS profile is telling us that there has been a stubborn gap of about 4.5 months between children who are eligible for free school meals and all the others. And 4.5 months is a lot when you're only 5 years old. And let's think about the Matthew effect. To those that have, there will be more. Children who've had that rich home learning are more ready to take advantage of everything that's on offer when they come into an early years setting. Now, at a child level, I know there's a lot of diversity. We work with lots of families here who are in poverty, who are struggling with poor housing, but nevertheless support their children's early learning really well. But the big picture in England is not a good one. In general, children from more advantaged backgrounds come into their early years setting, they're more ready to learn, and they take more advantage of what is on offer to them. They can use those experiences more efficiently. Our role, our moral duty is clear. We need to step in. We need to provide the very best quality of early years education and childcare that we're able to, because that will be good for everyone. But as I said earlier, it will be especially good for children living in disadvantage. But how do we know what the evidence is telling us about quality? We have to take care. All around us, people are bombarding us with different programs, different approaches, different interventions. They're making claims. And as a research school, we're all about saying to people, think critically about educational claims. There's a lot of them about. Beware. look carefully at the evidence. Take care before you decide to commit your time and effort and resources to following any particular approach that might be popular or persuasive in your school, in your local area. Take care. Where can you go? We really recommend that you check out the Early Years Toolkit on the Education Endowment Foundation's website. The Early Years Toolkit gives us 12 approaches for improving teaching and learning, summarizing the impact on attainment in average, the cost, and how strong the evidence is. It's a really good starting point for a professional conversation. And you'll see, if you look at the top left-hand corner of that slide, that communication and language approaches are powerful. Implemented well, they can make 6 months difference to children's progress in the early years. The evidence is strong, 4 padlocks, very well supported by the evidence, and it's not expensive to do. It's a really good bet, and that's what this afternoon is all about. So let's just move on now to consideration of this word that is buzzing around in early years at the moment, curriculum. And what do we mean by curriculum in the early years? This is how Development Matters explains it. It's that top level plan, all the experiences we want children to have, everything we want them to be able to do, to know, to understand as a result of their time with us. It's that top level plan. And preparing for literacy, as we'll explain as the session goes on, gives us a lot of guidance about how we can think about that plan and how we can focus on making sure that it's appropriate for the children we're working with. Planning to help every child develop their language is a vital part of the early years curriculum, and of course central to what we'll be talking about this afternoon. We need to think about the careful sequencing that will help children build their learning over time. So you'll hear, for example, about how important it is that before we start teaching children writing, that they've had all of those other experiences they need and that they're secure in those experiences. They've got the large and small motor skills. They've got the expressive language. So they've got things to say when they put pen or pencil to paper. But we've also got to remember that this is early years. Children's learning is often driven by their interests. So we don't want to get over-programmed. And in fact, last week, when Professor Kathy Silver was talking with me on the Early Adopters Facebook page, she was reminding us of her doctoral research, which showed how crucial independent play is to children learning to become problem solvers. It's also important to remember that babies and young children don't develop in a fixed way, and their development is much more like a spider's web with many strands, not like a straight line. And that's why we're going to be talking about curriculum guidance this evening, all of the things that we can offer children and all of the teaching and all of the experiences, the importance of that early, secure building blocks in their learning. But we're not saying that this happens in a straightforward way at the same age, at the same time for every child. Our focus is on what we're doing to help the children, geared to what they know and what they can do. And depth in early learning is so much more important than covering lots of things in a superficial way. And again, I hope that message will really come to life as part of our discussions in this session. Okay, what do Ofsted say about curriculum in the early years? That can be helpful to consider. They talk about us needing subject knowledge as well as pedagogical knowledge, that early years pedagogy, that rounded view of how children learn and how we can help them to learn, that includes play, that includes independent learning, that includes us getting stuck in an extended play, includes us guiding children's learning, and includes the direct teaching that it's also important for children to have. An Ofsted comment that in the early years, because of the rapid development of children of this age, there's a much greater stress on knowing our learners as individuals and on communication. By understanding child development and learning well, we can have a better understanding of possible next steps in children's development and learning. So, what are we thinking about here? I'm going to hand over to Fliss now, who's going to talk about the priority we're giving to communication.
Hi, everybody. So as Julian has already highlighted, we have to really consider our curriculum and making sure that we're planning for children's communication. And that's a vital, vital aspect of how we develop our curriculum in the early years. So the evidence from the Preparing for Literacy guidance really focuses on these key recommendations, and prioritising the development of communication and language is the first and foremost. So we want to really consider about the importance of how language provides a foundation for thinking and learning. And what the evidence shows us is about the priority that we need to focus on in terms of high quality adult-child interactions. They're absolutely vital. And it's about us talking with children, making that shift and having conversations and listening to children and really tuning in to them and making time for it, because that's something that actually is going to have an enormous impact on children's development. They have enormous impact on their ability to actually engage with our curriculum as well. And so when we think about the role of the adult, you know, all of us really do believe in that vital role that we have. And it's about how we are effective in really kind of modeling language and communication and really considering really all of those key strategies that we need to be able to focus on to ensure that we're having those high quality interactions. Things we can also do, which are highlighted in the report, are focusing on shared reading, dialogic book talk, really kind of using books as opportunities and starting points for rich conversations, storytelling. And that might be storytelling that comes from children themselves, and also storytelling that we engage in as well as adults, and really kind of encouraging that oral kind of use of telling stories. Additionally, we really need to consider how to explicitly extend children's vocabulary. So these are all strategies and approaches that are very effective in terms of really prioritising the development of children's communication and language. And so when you have a look at the report, you'll see this really highlighted in that very first section. And I think that something I often reflect on is just how not only enjoyable but powerful it is to engage in those rich conversations with children, and what you learn about children and the opportunities you have to really support their thinking and learning and modeling and introducing new vocabulary and really thinking about their interests and what motivates them as young learners. So some really powerful things to really consider from the evidence. So in terms of thinking about it from a curriculum perspective, it's about ensuring that we make sure that there is some sort of structure and sense of direction for the practitioners as well, because we want to make sure that it provides opportunities for all children to learn, that it is ambitious. And so focusing on communication language is especially important for young children and will really support the development of a range of early literacy skills, as well as their wider knowledge and understanding. So really powerful. So on this slide, you can see some statements around the prevalence of speech language communication needs, and just really highlighting yet again, the statistics around why prioritizing early communication language is just so important. 10% of all children and young people have speech and language communication difficulties that will persist all through their schooling. We know that many young offenders, up to 60% of young offenders, have speech, language and communication needs. We also need to consider the fact that children who may have some emotional and behavioural difficulties have unidentified language difficulties as well. So 81% is a massive number. Children living in areas of social disadvantage, so at much higher risk of being, of having delayed speech language communication, up to 50%. So again, if we think about the EEF's mission in terms of breaking that link, it's really important that we're really thinking about this. And two other key things. Language at age 5 is the single most important factor predicting literacy outcomes at age 11. So again, this really gives us this important evidence, this rationale for really focusing on those conversations, on those interactions, taking time to ensure that we're really making sure that they're of good quality. And children with poor vocabulary skills, unfortunately, are likely to be unemployed when they reach adulthood, twice as likely. So some really stark kind of reminders again about why we really need to focus on this. The next slide, please, Julian. Thank you. So something that we have been involved in at the East London Research and Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre was a really exciting project called Manor Talks. And this was a funded project which we delivered with settings and primary schools in the Manor Park area of Newham. And I was really fortunate to be involved in this project. And it was based on the Every Child a Talker programme. However, the difference within this particular programme was that the focus was on really thinking about how to create pedagogical change in settings. So this was the idea was to kind of equip practitioners and upskill them through a set of core strategies that they could be trained to deliver, but also simultaneously whilst aiming to achieve impact without significantly increasing practitioner workload. So really key things, key strategies that are evidence-based to really help practitioners listen to children and have conversations with them. And what was created as part of this was this wonderful poster. And I use it constantly. It's sort of dotted around the classrooms and the spaces around Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre. The settings that I work with, PVI settings, we use this particular poster and the strategies. And there's a whole range of really key strategies that were identified as part of this research project, really focusing on, sort of developing that joint attention through playing and interacting with children. But also thinking about those strategies around providing that sort of really appropriate and meaningful running commentary. So commenting on what children were doing and giving that rich language, really thinking about taking time and giving children that opportunity to process what has been said, really thinking about, the balance of comments and questions and ensuring that actually we would not be overloading children with too many questions, and making sure, again, that we always kind of think of that really great sort of rule of 4 comments to 1 question, which is often sort of supported by speech and language therapists. And so other kind of key strategies we're very much thinking about linking to that, a strategy that you might be familiar with, which is that idea of observing, waiting and listening to the child, making sure that the child is ready before you speak. And so we really kind of supported the practitioners to develop these pedagogical strategies and to listen to children, have conversations with them, engage in what is known as serve and return interactions, and try and build it up almost like playing tennis. So serve, return and rally, and really extend those opportunities, those multi-turn conversations. Because what we know from the evidence is that those multi-turn conversations back and forth literally change the architecture, the shape of children's brains. So really powerful. So moving on and thinking about vocabulary. So as we can see from the guidance report, that it is incredibly important to ensure that children are provided with a rich language environment, as well as explicitly extending children's vocabulary. And so one of the things from the Manor Park Talks project that was really interesting was that we really looked at how the practitioners were actually using words and introducing them to very young children, so even children of 2 and 3 years old. and being intentional about the words and labeling and naming words in play and routines, rather than just sort of saying this or that and pointing, but really kind of modeling those words. Because it's really important to ensure that we think about sort of the breadth and depth of children's vocabulary, developing the number of words that children know, and really kind of think about the context in which those words can be used. Children need so many opportunities to hear and use new vocabulary. And again, this idea of having these conversations, these opportunities for back and forth interaction really does provide that wonderful platform for, you know, modeling these new words and giving children opportunities to use them. Slide, please. And this, if you may have seen this particular diagram already within the guidance, vocabulary matters, you know, and so this particular sort of page really focuses on what is known as the tiers of vocabulary. And so making sure that we're giving the children those opportunities to learn rich vocabulary and introducing vocabulary in all of those meaningful contexts. So something I've been thinking a lot about recently, where it's been a bit rainy in our garden, the children have been fascinated by snails, is introducing the key words that children need to know around snails, and talking about tentacles, you know, and thinking about how we can support young children with learning new and unusual words and modeling it for them. Really, really powerful and really, really important to ensure that we're taking time to do that for our children. So beyond vocabulary, we need to think about other kinds of ways to develop children's language, their thinking, their reasoning. And within the guidance, there are lots of strategies that we can draw upon. And so on this particular slide, you'll see the types of questions that have been identified as effective in terms of supporting children to develop their reasoning skills. So things about sort of the question type and examples of what that might look like. So it's a little bit small on the screen perhaps, but you can kind of see the types of questions. So evidence, how do you know that Winnie the Pooh got stuck in the rabbit hole? You're really getting children to really think and recall and focus and kind of develop all of that wonderful reasoning. And as you can see, there are different types of questions. Things about, you know, so the reasons why, what's the theory, a counterfactual suggestion. So what would have happened if Winnie the Pooh had not have eaten the honey? Interesting to really ponder. False belief. So what does Winnie the Pooh think has happened to stop him from getting out? So getting children to really think about that. And also sort of those hypothetical suggestions. So what can he do next? And predicting and thinking about future events. There's lots and lots of scope to really think about the types of questions we use to develop children's reasoning and thinking. And very much linked to this is something called sustained shared thinking. And that is something that many of you will have heard about and potentially be familiar with. And so on the next slide, I can show you some of the strategies and features that are part of sustained shared thinking. So sustained shared thinking involves two or more people working together to solve a problem. So it's this idea of working together intellectually. And this can be, you know, adults and to child, and also this can happen between children as well. And the point is that it's to solve a problem, clarify an issue, evaluate activities, extend a narrative. And the point is that all parties who are involved in that interaction need to be able to extend the thinking. There has to be a contribution to thinking. And so there are a number of different strategies and features that as adults we can promote to really encourage sustained shared thinking. Tuning in, being, you know, really kind of aware of each unique individual child and, you know, sort of showing that genuine interest, listening carefully to what's being said, observing what they're doing. So being really mindful and present for that child. You know, giving your attention, eye contact, smiling, nodding, all of those important features of high quality interactions. other strategies are very much around sort of, again, linked to those questions, but ways to kind of develop children's thinking skills that adults can do. So encouraging children to elaborate on something. And so ways you can do that are sort of saying, well, I'd really like to know more about that. Also, how you as the adult can sort of recap for children, encourage them to sort of think about what they've already said. So you think that. But also, another key kind of approach and strategy would be about giving your own experience, really sort of sharing that as well and giving them something to consider. Oh, I like to listen to music when I'm cooking at home. All of those kind of opportunities to offer your own experience and to really model new vocabulary and stretch children's thinking. Clarifying ideas, using encouragement, suggesting, reminding, and asking those open questions. So really powerful statements to use, comments to use, strategies that encourage children thinking. And the point is with sustained shared thinking is that this happens between adults and children to children, and the focus is on a contribution to their thinking, really extending that. I was yesterday in class, I was walking through and I kind of noticed two children who were at the sort of graphics area in one of the classrooms, and they were having this wonderful conversation between themselves about how to change a drawing that had been created by one of them, and they were giving each other kind of like feedback and talking through the processes. And it was really interesting because they were going through some of these kind of features of sustained shared thinking, sort of listening to one another and actually saying, well, I think we need to add ears to the picture, but I want to make sure I've got black hair because my hair is black. Oh, okay, let's go and use this pen. And it was really fascinating, and I captured a little bit of it on video, and so it'd be really wonderful to kind of play it back to the children and really help them to sort of reflect on this experience of engaging in this form of sustained shared thinking together. But really powerful, and an indication of high quality settings. So those settings that engage in sustained shared thinking really are going to be making a difference to children's thinking and learning. And the next slide. Thank you. So just to really consider as well the importance of multilingualism. We really, really have to be empowering practitioners and parents as well to really consider the importance of learning additional languages. 20% of primary age children are speaking English as an additional language. And there are some really, really important myths to consider as well. It is a widely kind of reported myth that children are like little sponges and that they can suddenly just sort of acquire a language just by being, in the presence of other people speaking that language. But actually it's really, really hard. It's really hard, and it takes a lot of effort and motivation. And we have to really kind of consider that. So how can we support children acquiring more than one language? Key practice pointers, thinking about those kind of key words that they're going to need. Also thinking about rhymes and songs and well-chosen stories, because they're hooks for children to get into and to cue them into the language. It is hard to hold a conversation with a child who's acquiring a new language. And so we really need to think about how else to sort of support that process. How can we augment that with gestures, symbols, sign along, Makaton? Those things really do make a difference. But fundamentally, one of the most important things we really, really have to put across is ensuring that that home language, fluency in home languages is maintained and prioritized, and empowering everybody to really, really focus on that. Because if you are fluent in your home language, then that will serve as a building block for other languages as well. The key thing as well when we're considering multilingualism and children acquiring additional languages is that young children will often go through what's known as a silent period. And it's important to be aware of that and tune into that and provide the appropriate support to allow those children to observe and, really kind of feel at home in the setting and so forth. But also, we also need to make sure that we are really tuning into whether a child may have a difficulty, a speech language communication need in that home language, and picking that up so that we can make sure that we're providing the right kind of support. So children may have a silent period when acquiring a new language, but we also need to be aware that actually if that does not kind of progress and children are not starting to use the main language of English within the setting, that it's worth really considering and reflecting and talking to families and gathering that extra information just to ensure that there isn't an underlying speech language communication need.
And thank you so much, Fliss. And you know, one of the great delights of working with Fliss today is the way she's run back to the nursery school after doing forest school with the children and giving them all of those really rich hands-on experiences that are prompting them to talk and have those extended conversations. And it's been fantastic to see the children doing that. And when we're thinking curriculum here, we're explicitly reflecting what the guidance report says, which is prioritize children's communication at every stage within the early years foundation stage. Communication is really central. Now I'm delighted to hand over to Alison, who is another one of our evidence leads in education, who's going to talk to us about developing children's early reading. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Julian. So as it was just mentioned, we're going to look at an early reading using a balanced approach. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we don't just focus on one capability or skill. We're looking at a broad range of skills because that's much more effective than focusing on just one. So storytelling, developing letter and sound knowledge, singing and rhyming activities all help to develop phonological awareness, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And developing phonological awareness and children's interest in sound helps to prepare them for phonics instruction. So here I'm sure you're all familiar with the simple view of reading, which is Tunmer and Goss from 1986. It's still very relevant though. I'm going to look at it from the left-hand side first. I'm going to start in the left-hand top quadrant and then go down to the bottom left-hand quadrant. And you can see this model of reading discusses decoding and language comprehension. So in the top left-hand corner, you've got a learner who is good at recognizing words, but a poor comprehender. Sometimes this is referred to as someone who might bark at print, someone who doesn't understand what they're reading, but could very early on be identified as a quote unquote good reader, because the underlying word reading skills are there. Now, children who fall into this quadrant may well be at the early stages of learning literacy or English. So it takes longer to understand the English lexicon than it does to read words. They could also have a language difficulty. So children with language difficulties may well be strong word readers, but they're not necessarily understanding what they're reading. So never ignore it if a child is reading automatically and fluently, which means speed and expression. Never ignore the fact that they're having difficulty comprehending, because later on it could emerge that there is a difficulty there. Going down to the bottom left quadrant, we've got the learner whose word recognition is relatively weak, and so is their comprehension. So this child is struggling. They are struggling with reading. And when we talk about reading, obviously, remember, we're not just talking about decoding, which refers to reading words by using phonics. We're also talking about understanding as well. So they're going to need a lot of help. I'm going to go up to the top right quadrant now. So this is where you're getting into where most children are. They can recognize words and they're understanding what they're reading. Their language comprehension and their decoding skills are strong. No concerns there. But then when you get down to the bottom right quadrant, We're looking at children whose word recognition is weaker, but their comprehension is stronger. And later on, if this isn't monitored, we could find that these children may well be dyslexic sometimes. And what dyslexic children or children with dyslexic difficulties are very good at is using their relatively strong language comprehension to fill in gaps in meaning and to compensate for the poor word recognition. It's an amazing skill. Going back to the bottom left, those children, as well as having general difficulties, could also be new to English as well, or just starting their literacy journeys. One thing I noticed the guidance says, which is really important to bear in mind, even though we're focusing on early years, the skills of word recognition, whether it's by sight reading or decoding, and focusing on vocabulary development for language comprehension, all of the things that Flish discussed are relevant for older children too. They don't just stop in the early years. Next slide, please. So what kind of books can you use? Anything and everything. So books with rhyming words, any storybooks, traditional tales, non-fiction, great for having a look at all the different features of non-fiction. Even books aimed at children in reception can have very simple contents pages and picture glossaries as well, and very simple short indexes. And the beauty of non-fiction books for any age is that you don't have to start at the beginning. And I think that's something that's really important for young learners to discover straight off. You don't have to read the whole thing because it's not sequential. And it doesn't have to make sense. You are reading it for a different purpose than you are fiction. You're reading it for information. So you can start at page 3, you can go straight to the glossary, you can go wherever you like. And you can teach them about, they usually have the headings, and the headings tell you what's on the page. So I really like nonfiction for talking about lots of different features of books. Right now, we have some very nice books available online and through apps, such as Kindle. And obviously, books with pictures are invaluable for enriching children's vocabulary. And picture books with no words at all, where children can just make up their own stories, predict their own endings, are fantastic. They could even, photocopy the pages without breaching copyright, resequence the pictures, see how that changes the story. Going back to rhyming texts, the beauty of rhyming texts is that they teach you the rhythms of language, and you can just point out the words that rhyme without making it heavy into explicit, because they're usually the last words on the line and they always sound the same. Later on, children will learn that not only are rhyming words usually the last words on the line, but they might sound the same, yet they don't always look the same. But that journey for spotting patterns in rhyming words starts early on. So what makes a text easy? What makes it hard? Well, when I was thinking about this, I looked at the image for the book Up and Down, and I was looking at the ampersand, and that would be a really interesting feature to talk about with young children, because they might ask, what does that say? It says and. It's like, does it? And we're living in a technological revolution right now, and that is a symbol that they're going to see a lot. So little things like that might initially seem to make books inaccessible, but actually they're not. They are talking points. Can I have the next slide, please? So what helps? Well, any of us who are parents know that reading the same book over and over again helps with language learning. I have nightmares about Thomas the Tank Engine. The whole series, even though my son is now 16, they were read every night for a very long time. But it enriches the vocabulary, and just like listening to your favorite song over and over again, it helps children to love words. That's what it's about at this stage, that enrichment, that constant immersion. Let them choose what they want to hear over and over again. There's a reason that they find particular stories enticing, and especially books with repetition, so they get a feel and flavor for the flavor of different kinds of books. Next slide, please. So who's included? It's really important when we're thinking about what books to use, that the books, as far as we can, reflect our children. 7% of children's books published in the UK over the last 3 years feature characters of colour, but 1/3 of the UK's primary school population are from a minority ethnic background. So just think about that. 7% of children's books feature characters of colour, yet 1/3 of primary school children are from a minority ethnic background. And the number of children's books published in the UK over the last 3 years, from 2017 to 19, so a little bit out of date, increased by 10%. Sorry, to 10% in 2019. Still not really that high, is it? It really isn't that great. And this underrepresentation is a serious issue, because I can remember growing up on a diet of Janet and John and Topsy and Tim and the Mr. Men, which was very nice, but it would have been nice also to hear and read Had a Surprise and Jazz Baby. It's very important to see yourself reflected in the world of fiction, because it says that it confirms your existence, and it confirms that you count, and it shows that your life is important enough to represent. It's as simple as that. It's really, really important. And there are some very, very nice books from authors of colour, as well as white authors too. It doesn't matter who wrote it, it's about the representation. Can I have the next slide, please? So, print referencing and concepts about print. So what are they? Why are they important? How can we check them? And how can we teach them? Well, unless adults strategically and deliberately highlight print, children spend less than 6% of read-aloud time focusing on it. And that's from page 63 of the guidance. So print referencing and concepts about print. Basically, we can track print while reading. So that's using one-to-one correspondence. I call it the following finger, putting a finger under each word and making comments about the letters or words. We can also ask children to help count the number of words on a page, if they can count, and find specific letters such as capitals or words that start with the same letters. So looking for patterns in language and important features of language, developing underlying literacy skills that provide strong foundations for later. And children can play detective and find familiar words or long words or short words. They don't have to read them. They can just notice the length of the words so they can see the shapes of the letters. But what we must be important, it's important not to do, is to do print referencing in a way that disrupts the flow of enjoyment, so that it's all about teaching. You are reading, and it's something that should come naturally. So we're showing that print carries meaning. We're showing that books have a front cover, they have a back cover with a blurb which you could read, oh, what's this book about? And we read from the beginning, if it's fiction, to the end, if we want it to make sense. And when you're turning the pages, you could look at the numbers. Okay, we go across from the odd number to the even number. I've worked with children who, when they've come to the end of page 1, will flick and go straight to page 3. They have to be taught, no, you can just go straight across. The next page is actually the facing page. It's page 2, little things like that. And please don't take it for granted that very young children will automatically pick this up, because I have worked with older children who still confuse in speech and what a letter is and what a word is, and sometimes what a word and a sound is. So we can't take those things for granted. Consistent, explicit modeling, but make it fun. Next slide, please. So, on to meta-linguistic awareness and why it's important. Well, page 63 of the guidance says, the central goal of print referencing is to engage emergent readers in conversations about print that foster meta-linguistic awareness. Now, meta is Greek for beyond, and meta-linguistic awareness involves going beyond communication and meaning to focus on the underlying structures of language. So this is, in the simplest terms, a child's ability to talk and to think about written and spoken language. And this is going back to what I mentioned before about some older children struggling to identify the difference between a word and a letter or a sound. Children need to understand terms such as read. What does that mean? Write. What does that mean? Word and letter. And so, for instance, children with excellent phonological awareness are adept at identifying and manipulating speech sounds in words. I'll talk more about that later. And phonemic awareness, which we'll also discuss later, is another example. Jokes and understanding what kind of speech is appropriate in different environments and with different people is an example of meta-linguistic awareness. We call that code switching. And it helps you to understand the intricacies of language. So it focuses on the underlying structures. Thank you, Julian. So the peer framework is a simple sequence that can be used to support shared or dialogic reading when you're discussing the text with a child. And when reading together, we can pause and we can prompt the child to say something about the book. So you might, in the guidance, there's a very nice example of saying, you can say, oh, look, there's, what's that? And the child would respond, and they might say it's a zebra. And then you would evaluate their response and say, that's right, it's a zebra. And then you could expand their response by rephrasing or adding information to it, saying, yes, that's right, it's a zebra. It's got black and white stripes, 4 legs. Well, oh, look, it's got 2 ears. And how many tails has it got? And then repeat the prompt to help them to understand the expansion of whatever that they have said. And that makes all of that together makes a very nice acronym called PEER. There's another acronym called CROWD in the report: completion, recall, open-ended discussion and questions, who, what, when, where, why, when questions, and distancing to connect the child's own life as a source of discussion. So it's really important, as we said earlier, that children can see themselves in what they're reading. So going on to phonological and phonemic awareness, so singing and rhyming activities can help to develop these. And as phonological awareness develops, children can become increasingly able to hear and manipulate smaller units of sound. So it's all about sound. It's not about writing or reading. It can help with that, but it's sound-based. And children with well-developed phonological awareness can spot rhymes and syllables and recognize the same initial sounds, such as M in money and mother. And even with very young children, if you ask them to try to visualize the word cup, if they are able to segment and blend and recognize sounds, ask them to take away the k, ask them, oh, is there a new word? What is it? And they should be able, hopefully, to do that purely through visualization and listening. Next slide, please. So phonemic awareness is a subset of phonological awareness, and it involves hearing and manipulating sounds. And phonics approaches aim to improve phonemic awareness and to teach children about the relationships between speech sounds and letter combinations. So sh is CH and sh is SH, and so on. Next slide, please, Julian. So here's what the research says about teaching phonics. Obviously, all staff need to be trained. We need to make sure we're pronouncing sounds properly. We need to check understanding of phonemes, graphemes, and morphemes in words. We need to check that we're using the right language. Talking briefly about pronunciation, we must make sure that we don't add the schwa, the sound. So it's t, not t, v, not v, because adding the schwa, the can affect smooth blending later on. And obviously morphemes are the smallest meaningful parts of words. So affixes such as pre and ness. Obviously, we've got to revisit, and revisit. We must encourage and provide lots of opportunities for children to read a lot in sessions and speak a lot and listen a lot and write a lot. And although RML, letters and sounds, etc., are fantastic programs, we have to remember that they are designed with a generic child in mind, and there's no such thing as a generic child. So we will need to adapt as we go along, but we must make sure, as the guidance says, that the program remains sequential and that the program is cumulative, that we are going back and going forward. We're always revisiting before going forward. And the lowest attaining children should have the most trained teacher. Next slide, please. So to finish off my bit, we're looking at a very nice diagram called the reading rope. And it is Scarborough's reading rope. I love this diagram because I think it's an accurate representation of the complex strands involved in reading. And Holly Scarborough's reading rope actually came from lectures for parents about the complexities in learning to read. And she makes it clear that both knowledge and skills are important to support the development of word reading accuracy and language comprehension. So I'm just going to very quickly go through the strands. They're all balanced. So obviously vocabulary is understanding and using a wide range of words and finding connections between them. Then we're looking at language structure. I'm at the top part for the pink strands here for language comprehension. So she's looking at semantics and syntax. So can children understand the meaning of the text? For example, what is a pen? Is it a place for animals or a writing instrument? Does a child know what a sentence is? Does the arrangement of words and phrases in the sentence make sense? How do they know when it ends and when a new one begins? Verbal reasoning is problem solving with words and language, and it's not just about vocabulary, it's about thinking about relationships between words and ideas, like sun is to sky as fish is to sea. And it's about making inferences and understanding metaphors. And then obviously literacy knowledge, which we've talked about, print concepts and different genres. So it's a very useful model for illustrating the complex interlinked strands of reading. And she mentions sight recognition as well. We talk a lot about phonics. Sight word reading is equally important because we can't decode everything. We can't decode words like said and was. They must be taught explicitly. And that's it from me.
Blimey, 18 months on Zoom and I still speak without remembering to unmute myself. Alison, thank you so much for that. Now we're going to change the pace a little bit now. We've got a very large group here. We're going to split you into 5 smaller groups, breakout rooms, to think curriculum again about when should we start teaching writing. Now it's more than possible that our evidence leads in education won't be automatically assigned to the correct room because we know that these things never go as smoothly as we want them to. So what we'd like you to do is, based on your reading of that TES article, and we're hoping that lots of you have read that, just when you get put into your breakout room, just share a few lines in the chat about when you think we should start reading. We should start teaching writing. A few lines in the chat about that. And then the evidence lead in education who's leading your group will come and join you. So I'm just going to hopefully succeed in putting you into breakout rooms, which we're going to do for about 10 minutes. And we're thinking about this one key question. When should we start teaching writing in the EYFS? So I'm going to create those rooms now. Okay, so if Great. If you're in the main room, put something in the chat about when you think we should start teaching writing. What do you think? Especially if you had a chance to read the TESPs, but even if you didn't, just put a few words in the chat about your thoughts. We'd be really interested to hear them. Great. So there's some really interesting comments coming through there. But I would say one of the key terms that's coming out is about when children are ready. It would be great if someone who's put a comment there about being ready would like to unmute and just share your view with us. We'd be really interested to hear. So be bold and unmute yourself and say a bit more about the physical skills and being ready.
I think that if when children are given purposeful experiences of writing, they will be more inclined to want to do it. So, you know, then it's that emergent writing that has a purpose to them is when they're ready to start writing. Obviously, the formal, you know, letter formation and the, you know, what it talks about in the article has to come a lot later. But I think that, you know, taking the pressure off of them to get it right is when it's the right, that's when it's the right time for them to, you know, to be exposed to it.
Great. And what I'm hearing in there is the way we have to hold on to two things here. First of all, there's emergent writing. Those are the marks and the symbols where children themselves want to make marks to express their ideas, really happening from a very young age, arguably when babies start to make marks in their food, for example. There's meaning behind that. And that's about really the materials and the encouragement and the support for emergent writing. But then there's also what you might call the teaching of writing, which is when we might judge that we're going to teach a child how to write their name or how to form letters correctly. So we have to hold those two things in mind, I think. Okay, over to other people on screen, because there's so many good ideas coming across in the chat. So we'd love to hear from someone else.
Hi, I was just going to suggest that this year I've really concentrated on modelling of drawing and having that. I modelled it before activities and things like that, and that's had a real effect on the children's ability to draw and then try and write about it with their emergent writing, and it's had a really benefit. It's really good benefit this year. So I just want to let you know that.
That sounds really interesting. Tell us some more about that.
I do like inquiry-based teaching. So asking questions, and then I will model for them. Say, for example, if it's an experience, so we did the train ride, and I say, like, what did you see from outside the window? So I modeled what I saw, and I wrote a sentence, just wrote a sentence about it. And I left some paper just on the table with a picture of a train window, and the children would write about their experiences, drew pictures of their experiences, and then they wrote about it. And I found that because I've modelled it, and when I'm modelling, I'm saying, let's have a look at the formation of the shape. Oh, I saw a sheep, so I actually modelled the vocabulary as well as I'm drawing it. And it's improved their fine motor skills as well. So by doing that, sorry.
Really interesting to hear from you. Thank you. I can see lots of nods on screen. Okay, who else? Lots of good stuff in the chat there. So let's hear from other people.
Can I just say, Casey, we do that as well. We do a lot of modelling of drawing to the children, and we also use Talk for Writing schools, which I don't know if some of the children, if any of the other practitioners do. But what we've found is that by teaching them to draw, the children then have the confidence to draw their story maps. And then over time, as they progress, they're able to then label their pictures, just very simple level. And then obviously we build up to being able to write a sentence or write a key word, because they've rehearsed and know their story so well, and the visuals that they've drawn really assists then. As one of the big things, obviously, later down the line, when they do start to construct a sentence, is to actually be able to remember what it is that they want to write. So I think that the drawings really assists with that. So thank you for making that point, Katie.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying we're moving on to Talk for Writing for next year. That's in our action plan. So yeah, that's really interesting to
You'll love it. You'll love
I know,
it.
I know I will. I've just done all the training. So yeah, so thank you.
Good stuff.
Great. And we've got someone here who's put a reference to helicopter stories. Do you want to tell us about helicopter stories and building on Vivian, Gus and Paley's work there?
Hi, yeah, it was just something that I introduced in my class as sort of like a trial, and we do provision-based learning. So it was purely something that we could do independently for the children. We encourage children to talk about their story, so it's all that oral side of storytelling. The pressure of actually writing their story is totally removed. We can scribe the story, they can verbally do it, mark make it, and then we sit in a circle and act it out. But the whole oracy of that and the storytelling side, the writing in my class has just gone through the roof. It's all independent, and it's just based off their interest, and the development that I've seen over the whole year is unbelievable.
Wow, and that's very much reflected in the guidance report Preparing for Literacy, where it talks about, first of all, prioritizing children's communication and language, so having stories that they can tell is really important. And secondly, motivation to write, the motivation when it's so hard. But if children are bursting with a story or something to write down, that's very powerful, isn't it, when you're a little child in a reception class?
Stories throughout the year, and at the beginning of the year it was always shopping lists, but throughout the year you can see links to what we're learning, or even letters to Santa, traditional tales, and you can see the development. So scratchy bits of paper have now developed to full books with front covers, author and their name, pictures and labels. So yeah, I'd really promote that.
Great, that's another really interesting contribution. I think we've got time to hear from one more person. It would be great to hear from someone else.
Vivian, I'm happy to say something.
Great, thank you.
I'm in nursery, and I just wanted to raise the importance of play, independent play when it comes to writing. So, you know, when children are really engaged in their independent play, that's when we've seen the opportunities for writing. So rather than it being an adult directed task, however interesting that might be, when children are really engaged in their own play and see a reason to write. So I'll give you an example. We had some children building a garage, and they were building this garage. They had lots of talk around it, and the adults supported them by saying, but how do we know when the garage is open and when it's closed? And off they went to get, you know, their clipboards to write a little sign that they could write on there when it was open, when it was closed, and that was scaffolded and supported. So I think, you know, that's a really good way of getting children to independently have a go at writing, because they're most interested themselves.
Thank you, Helen. So I'm just going to close the breakout room, which is going to give us a minute. And I think that if I was just to pull some of those threads together, we're thinking, and Fliss will talk about this some more in a moment, about a bit, if you think like that Scarborough's reading model, we're thinking about skills that need to be taught to children individually and carefully for children to gain that fluency in their writing. But we're also thinking about motivation and independent learning, and the fact that if children don't really want to write, they're very unlikely to achieve much early success in this area. So that motivation is so important for our young children. Okay, and the chat is amazing. I've never seen so many messages in a chat. So really big thank you to everyone who's contributed to the chat there. Thank you so much for that. And if you have time, have a scroll down and see what colleagues have been saying. So we're running a little bit late, but we really didn't want to cut out that moment to have some sharing in the breakout room. So I'm going to hand back to Fliss now, who's going to talk us through what the guidance report from the Education Endowment Foundation says about helping children's writing in the early years. And a really big thank you to everyone for your contribution in the chat and for unmuting there. Very, very much appreciated. So Fliss, we're going to hand over to you. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much, Julian. We had some really interesting comments highlighted in our breakout room. So let's think a little bit more about this from the perspective of the guidance report. So recommendation 3, developing children's capability and motivation to write. And so as you can see on this slide, we've got these kind of 4 key bullet points of really thinking about how expressive language, as I kind of really highlighted just how important that language, prioritizing that language communication is. It underpins writing, really, really important. You know, we've got to prioritize that. It's one of the best ways to help children become fluent readers and writers in later life. We have to provide a wide range of opportunities. You know, really need to make sure that there's that variety. And as we've just discussed in our breakout group, the idea of having opportunities that are meaningful and purposeful. Children need to know why there's a reason to write. You know, that's going to make a really big impact on their motivation. Develop the foundations of fast, accurate and efficient handwriting style. And then also really consider how to monitor process and product of handwriting. Those key points. So we're thinking about writing, you know, as I sort of really just highlighted there, you know, it is underpinned by children's expressive language capabilities. You know, it's important that we're really kind of aware of how to tune into children's capability to really kind of form those increasingly sophisticated sentences and express them. But what's interesting to really kind of consider as well is that, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, we don't want children kind of toiling away, working really, really hard at writing who are not yet speaking in sentences. You know, we really need to kind of be aware of that. And that's, again, linking that back to our curriculum. You know, we need to make sure that children have all of those opportunities, and we cannot emphasize and overestimate the power of those back and forth conversations and those opportunities to develop that expressive language and also their receptive language at the same time. So those activities will include storytelling, that dialogic book talk, all of those wonderful kind of story-based activities that Alison was just highlighting, reading, role play, so many wonderful opportunities within our settings that are going to promote that use of expressive language that underpins children's ability to write effectively and really kind of motivates them, so they can see why it's fun and a reason and a need to be able to write. So we're going to watch this wonderful video very quickly about helicopter stories, and literally just as our breakout room kind of just pinged away, someone had popped up the word helicopter stories in the chat. And you know, for me personally, this is something that I feel really passionate about. And so many of you will have heard about the helicopter storytelling approach, which was developed by Make Believe Arts on the basis of Vivian Gussin Paley's work, who was a teacher based in Chicago, who was so passionate about storytelling and using the children's stories to form the basis of her curriculum. And so we're going to watch this now, and it's just wonderful.
Thank you, Fliss. And just before I put that on, we're now running about 15 minutes late, so we're going to finish at 5:15. We understand if people need to leave early, but just so you've got a shape of the session. But without any more ado, let's motor over to the London Borough of Tower Hamlets and see a group of children taking part in helicopter stories with Make Believe. art.
Happens when somebody's told a story and we act it out. But I wonder if anyone here has got a story they'd like to tell me. Manal, what I'm going to do is I've written your name here, and your story can be as short as you like, but it can't be any longer than the bottom of the page, okay? All right, so do you want to tell me your story? Okay, let me write that down. Once upon a time, there was a friendly tiger. And then there was a friendly lion. When we act out your story, do you want to be the friendly tiger or the friendly lion, or do you want to be the wind? You want to be the friendly tiger. Okay, I'm going to put a circle around the friendly tiger.
2 lions.
Oh, is there 2 lions? Yeah. Is there 1 tiger but 2 lions, yeah?
No, 2 tigers and 2 lions.
Oh, you want 2 tigers and 2 lions. There was 2 friendly tigers. So do you want to come up now and show me how your tiger moves? And Evie, can you come and show me how your tiger moves? And there was 2 friendly lions. 1, 2. Can you come be the friendly lions? And they were playing together. Can I see them playing together? Fantastic. And then began yesterday. They were not friends together. Can I see you not being friends together? Oh, look at this. They're really not friends. Fantastic. Then the wind blew them off. 1, 2, 3. Can you come and be the wind, Thomas? Can you come and be the wind here? Can you see them now? And can you show me how the wind blows? Can I see them blowing? And let's see them being blown around. Let's see them being blown. Fantastic. And then they come friends again. Can I see you becoming friends again? Fantastic. And there they are, the lion and the tiger being friends. Excellent. Let's clap. Thank you. Okay, what happens?
Thanks, Julian. So as you can see, a really, really powerful, joyful experience that taps into so many different aspects of children's learning and development, but it's particularly useful for really thinking about children's motivation to write. And also, as part of it, you're seeing the adult is scribing the child's story, breaking the flow of speech into words. So it's really helping children start to see that connection as well. And if you want to find out more information about that, if you go to makebelievearts.co.uk, you can Google it quite easily, but it's helicopter stories letting imagination fly. And it's, you know, a really powerful approach. And I could probably talk about that for the whole hour if I was given a chance. But so thinking then about handwriting. So, you know, within the guidance reports, that is something that has been really kind of identified in terms of the evidence base, in terms of making sure that, you know, children have the right kind of grip, that they are not finding this really uncomfortable and challenging. But obviously, you know, we really need to kind of consider the overall physical development that supports handwriting as well. You know, achieving good results at the end of key stage assessments is of crucial importance. And so there is this pressure, you know, on practitioners to get children writing, you know, and whether they're developmentally ready or not. And that's really, really key to kind of really think about, because we do not want to kind of create this scenario in which this pressure really impacts upon children's opportunity to practice movement for letter formation. Really, really important. And I just, at this point, just really want to just very quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I think it's really important just to make the point around body movement supporting fine motor skills, and that the body needs to be stable before the hands can be free to focus on those specific fine motor skills. So we do really need to make sure that there are those rich opportunities, that your curriculum really prioritizes opportunities for all children to have gross motor skills and fine motor skill opportunities. You know, really thinking about those kinds of opportunities indoors and outdoors. It's vital to ensure that all children have a chance to engage in these activities, that our environments are rich and stimulating, and we're giving children those experiences where they can start to build strength in their body and therefore the dexterity in their young hands and fingers, being physically active, using the whole body and supporting that to be able to really kind of, you know, develop stability in their shoulder, isolate and rotate their arms, hold a pencil in a pincer grip. It's really, really important to be aware of that. So if we're thinking then about preparing for handwriting, there are these really useful resources from Highland Literacy, and it shows kind of all of those different kinds of skills and things that we can do to kind of prepare the ground, prepare it. So again, reiterating the point that language communication has to be, you know, prioritized, but also making sure that if, you know, we give to children the right experiences, because they need to understand directional language. You know, they need to know things like up, down, round and back, and we need to give them those opportunities. So in our early years curriculum, we do need to think about carefully planning and sequencing things so that children can develop their communication skills and their physical skills. There's vital prime areas, and they need that teaching first so that they can learn to write fluent sentences. And that's how we can really make sure that we're preparing children for being able to engage in handwriting and really kind of think about that evidence from the guidance report, that we really kind of need to make sure we're supporting children with the right kinds of opportunities. So I feel like I'm rushing through now. But, you know, thinking about just how complex it is, that coordination of visual, motor skills and motor skills, and that there are children who will experience handwriting difficulties, up to 30%. So monitoring, planning appropriate support and intervention, really making sure that there are opportunities for some children who will need individualized attention it's being provided, but also thinking about what that specific issue is. And it's also, you know, it's important to kind of remember that it's very challenging for children to unlearn poor habits. So if we can find ways to make sure those issues are being picked up early, supporting appropriate development of grip, then that's going to be more effective than that later intervention. And that's all about how we prioritize the communication language, really think about what our curriculum, how our curriculum highlights physical development and giving all of those movement play, that's strength opportunities, hanging on monkey bars and being upside down and spinning and tumbling and rolling, and those fine motor opportunities, just so we can make sure that we're really tuned into that. And the last slide, I think. So just thinking about developing the foundations of fast, accurate and efficient writing style. So really thinking about, you know, the opportunities to really think about directionality. And again, in the guidance report, it shows you this particular image, which really highlights just how important it is to make sure that they're using the right kind of process, and keeping the, you know, they might form the letter accurately, but actually it's about, you know, sort of the process of it, you know, not using 4 separate strokes, but actually thinking about where to start and so forth. So really important to kind of consider that.
Great, thank you, Fliss. And thank you everyone who's hanging on in there. As I said, we are going to end a little bit late, but we'll try not to end too late, because we know you've all got lives to return to after this. So we can sometimes find it a bit scary to think about curriculum in the early years, and we're hoping that using the EEF guidance report, Preparing for Literacy, we've given you that kind of portal into curriculum. Let's not formally teach children to write unless they've got the expressive language and vocabulary and the physical skills that they need. And that is an approach which rests on sound curricular design, on making sure that children have got all of those building blocks securely in place. That's really important. Scarborough's reading rope is a useful model for some aspects of early learning, where we have to teach some bits separately and help children to become really fluent and do them automatically, so that then over time they can weave those different strands together and become really competent at what they're doing. We don't want to see early formal instruction of writing and 7 and 8-year-olds in school toiling to write a sentence, their hands in agony, not able to think about what they want to say because they're finding the process of handwriting so difficult. So that's where this curriculum framework is significant for us in the early years. And when we think about disadvantaged children, you will have noticed we've spoken a lot about things that need to be taught or shown explicitly. That's really key to supporting those children who may not have had some of the earlier building blocks in their learning at home, because their families have understandably got different priorities to get through daily life. Explicit teaching really benefits children from disadvantaged backgrounds. The best research we've got on phonics, for example, shows that it doesn't do any harm to any young reader, but it is especially beneficial for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I'm afraid to say there's a strong correlation between children who are living in poverty and children who aren't learning to read. That's why it's important when we're thinking about equality, those bright futures for all of our children. I'm not going to labour the point about assessment, apart from to say a few important things. First of all, curriculum drives assessment. So in other words, we've got our clear picture of what it is we want children to experience, know, and be able to do. And we have assessment to check that that's working. We check that all of those preceding skills are securely in place before we formally teach handwriting to children. We check children's phonological awareness because that's so important. So assessment is best when it is geared to the curriculum, and it's crucial that we think about why we're collecting information and what we plan to do with that information, rather than just jumping in and doing it without having any clear purpose in mind. That's where workload quickly gets out of hand. It's very important to remember that young children develop at different rates. So we mustn't use assessment to label children. We sometimes hear about children who are low ability or high ability in the early years, but we don't know. We don't know what the capability of any of our children is in the early years, because child development is so variable. And the danger is that a label like low ability starts to become a prediction. What we need to think about instead is children may be struggling with some aspects of their early learning. Our assessment highlights that. Our practice means that we quickly give them the extra help they need. We work closely with their parents. We don't consign them to a label of low ability. 70% of children with an early language difficulty will grow out of it and catch up with their peers. They're not low ability children. They're young children whose speech and understanding is slightly slower to develop than others, and that's normal in child development. We mustn't use assessment to divide children into fixed categories, but instead we've got to have that conviction that all of our children can succeed given the right support. Okay, there's also, I've lost a bit of this slide for some reason, but there's an important point to be made about screening and working with health, which is that if children can't hear well or they can't see well, no matter how brilliant your early literacy program is, they're not going to learn well. So it's important, if you're in reception, to understand and know what the local health authority provides in terms of screening for hearing and vision. Lots of children have undiagnosed hearing and vision difficulties in the early years. So it's really important that we have those health screening programs and that children get the help they need. And if they're meant to wear glasses, they must wear glasses. And again, it looks like this affects disadvantaged children and children from particular ethnicities more than the average child. So it's a big equality issue for us. Check that all of our children have had health screening. Okay, so I'm going to be really honest. Coming along this evening, and it's been great to meet and hear from so many people. And, you know, we had roughly 300 people online for most of the session. And that has been terrific. And it's great to see you all here. But we're really honest. This is not going to change anything for your children. You might have heard interesting things. You might have taken part in an interesting discussion in the chat, but it's not enough to change things for your children. But you can change things for your children. You can make the difference. But that's by engaging in a sustained program of professional development with your team, focused on a key priority area for your children. So tonight we're talking about preparing for literacy. We strongly recommend that you read the full report and think through what it's saying. And we strongly recommend that you join in with your local research school and take part in that sustained program that's all about understanding the evidence, but the tricky business of putting that into action and making a difference to our practice, making a difference to our children's life chances. So we hope we've given you a taster this evening, and we hope you will follow this through in your independent reading and study, and by linking up with your local research school. If you Google Research School Network, you can find and connect with your local research school. You can sign up to their newsletter and see what's going on. And I'm just going to leave us with this final challenge about curriculum, which is this, and I really like it from Dylan William, where he talks about principal curriculum design. And he says that we're all constantly involved in curriculum development, but we don't pay enough attention to it. There is a lack of attention to this process. We don't give it enough time. It's generally done by teachers working alone. It tends to be done ad hoc. And we're really saying, as a kind of call to action this evening, don't be in that place that Dylan William talks about, doing things on your own after the children have gone home as an ad hoc activity. But think really hard about how you can get your whole team to work together with you, to think about that vertical integration of curriculum. So what are the secure foundations we're giving children, because they're important now? And how's that going to support their later learning when they leave your setting and start reception, or if you're in a school as they move from early years into key stage 1? What's the vertical design, and have you got that right? Don't do it on your own, and don't do it ad hoc. It's got to be a team effort if it's going to make a difference. Fantastic to have so many of you joining us this evening. We're going to wish you fond farewell. We're sorry for taking up more time than we said we would originally. And if and when you're getting a break this summer, boy, do you deserve it after the year that you've had. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a good evening.